I can't see. I'm too small. Stop, Bailey, don't show.
Careful. Really, guys?
He bumped it.
Bro, look at this bed.
There's a dog bed.
Hey, Carter, look at this. Carter, look at this bed.
Daddy. Oh, it's pink.
It's pink.
This house is like too tiny. Oh, this is
Oh, careful.
This would be awesome to live in.
I can't see.
Go stand over there.
Picture. Right there.
Yeah, I know. It leads to the one that was in the kitchen. Oh, on the top of it.
Ellie,
Still,
I'm only making this much vlogs, so I'm going to delete some.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And you're only going to post 5?
That house, if I didn't have a house.
1 on the bus, 1 going home, and 3 here.
Hey, and Natalie, I would have bought that house if I didn't have a house.
I need to go find Bailey.
Bailey's over there.
Boys and girls, kept on touching stuff and like moving stuff. I was like, what? Yeah, rocking.
What are you doing?
Are you recording?
Yeah? Yeah, close
Are
to
you
you.
actually posting that on YouTube?
Yep.
Natalie, that's why they use the bathroom. In that little cabin. Why didn't you put the camera on inside?
I did.
Oh.
Gotta go.
Whoa, this house is pretty. I think this house is pretty. Yeah, but just like
The outside looks big.
Oh my god. This is the school. A creepy woman is in there. That's creepy as heck. Math, 700. That is so creepy.
yeah, the mannequin's
Can I just go in and kill it? Can I just go in and kill it?
Look what they're teaching. There's no see the cat. The cat is little.
That is so scary. That's so dumb.
I'm making a video.
It's time to listen.
Told me to.
This is the 1861 Dixie Schoolhouse. It's set out in the country away from the little village of Dixie, which is about 15 miles from here. It was for the education of the farm and ranch children who lived in that area. The numbers of students would vary from week to week, sometimes day to day. In an agricultural area like this, the little country schools were the ones who were started first. Later on, when towns got big enough and could afford to build their own school and keep a school teacher year-round, then they would do that. But the little country schools were the first places that most people got their education. In an area like this, the school year would depend on, guys, you need to be quiet. If you have questions, just hang on to them. The school year would depend on the weather and on the crops. So by now, the crops are growing, so the kids would be in school. But when they were still doing spring planting, the kids would be at home. And the older children would help with the planting, and then the younger children would help with whatever household chores needed to be done. Then everybody would go to school until time for fall harvest. And then they would stay home and help with the harvest because everybody was needed to do that. Once crops start ripening, they don't wait for anybody, so they need all hands available. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get up into the agricultural exhibit halls here in a little bit. You'll see on the desks that almost every desk has something different. That's because the parents had to provide any school materials that the kids took to school with them. and most families did not have or could afford to buy books. So a child would probably bring a little storybook of some kind, maybe even a book of poetry, could even be a newspaper from back east that some other family member had sent them. It could be just pretty much anything. Most families had to leave books at home or sell them or get rid of them because it was one of those expendable things. They're valuable to us and they were valuable to them, but when you're going across mountains, sometimes you have to take things out of your covered wagon and leave them behind, and very often books and furniture were one of the first things to go, because you had to make sure that the wagon wasn't too heavy for the animals that were pulling it. So that's why whatever they had left, they would send to school. That way a child could at least pick out letters and words in the little book, regardless of what was in the book, so that way they could follow the lesson. They would also be grouped according to where they were in their ability to read and write and do basic math, not by age. So that she may start her lesson the first thing in the morning with the kids that were just barely learning to read and write, and then she would assign somebody who was a little bit better than they are, a little bit more skillful, so that they could continue the lesson and make sure they could stay on track, and if they had any questions, that older student could help them. So that's how she would do it. She may have anywhere from 10 to 20 students, and that would vary, like I said, from week to week, sometimes from day to day. If the child was needed at home for some reason, they just didn't show up for school that day, and then the teacher would go check on them later to make sure everything was all right. But they had a completely different culture in those days as far as education. But it was extremely important because just like parents today, those parents wanted their kids to learn as much as they could for the time that they had in school. The teachers were hired from one year to the next, so it wasn't always a guarantee that there would be a teacher there the next year. If the school board couldn't find somebody that wanted the job or that was satisfactory for the job, then there just wasn't any school. So that's why it was also very important to learn as much as they could while they had somebody available. Okay, any questions about the school at this point? Yes?
I've counted the seats, and there are actually 12 seats in here.
Mm-hmm.
She said about 10 to 20.
Yeah, this is set up like, well, it was a real schoolhouse, and it was set up similar to what the Dixie School would have looked like. If she had more students, then she had chairs, then they would have to sit on the floor. They would have to sit on maybe just a keg of some kind. They just made do with what they had. Yes, you have a question?
Is the school for all ages?
Yes, anybody who wanted to come to school and work. If they caused a problem, she didn't have time to mess with them because other people were there to learn. So if you wanted to come and be a problem, then you had to go do something else. She probably had you outside chopping firewood or doing something. Okay. Yes.
Okay, let's go.
The display, okay?
That's my arm. I'm resting my arm. I'm just filming.
We actually have two playhouses in the Pioneer Village. This is one of them. This belonged to the Jakey family. They had two little boys, and they built this little miniature log cabin out in their backyard.
That's tiny.
When the boys grew up and moved away, one of the Boy Scout troops here in Walla actually started having meetings in this house. So it stayed there until the late 60s.
Oh, that boy's creepy. Nope. Hashtag Josiah. I didn't show that.
And then you drop it and you flick it. He was playing marbles.
Imagine like just turn it on. Perfect.
Hashtag
Do you still think a hashtag?
Yeah.
And you know who owned it? Guys, she's
This is the oldest building in Pioneer Village.
Well, McDonald's had
This is the Ramsey cabin. It was built in 1859 and set on a grassy area like this, probably about 18 miles to the southwest of here. This not only is a unique, not only unique in its architecture, but it also has connections back to the 1855 Treaty Council, which we'll talk about when we get to that little building over there. There was something called the Land Donation Act that was passed by Congress shortly after the 1855 Treaty Council. It enabled people to come into the Walla Walla Valley and basically take whatever land they wanted, and they would get a deed for it. That sounds very bizarre, but it was something that was not intended to be. It was a big misunderstanding that came out of the Treaty Council. The Indians had agreed to go on to a 1.3 million acre reservation, and but they were able to maintain their hunting and fishing rights. Governor Isaac Stevens really mishandled the whole idea. What he started out to do was a good idea, because we'd already had the massacre at Whitman Mission in late 1847. This is now 1855. And the Native Americans were seeing more and more people pour into the Walla Walla Valley, and it made them very uneasy. So Governor Stevens called a treaty council. He had representatives of the government and representatives of the 14 bands and tribes of Native Americans who lived in this immediate area. They sat down and worked for about a week and a half to come to some kind of agreement. And basically the Native Americans walked away with pretty much what they started out with, which was their fishing and hunting rights. But they were told that they had 2 years to move on to this reservation, which eventually became the Yakima Reservation. And they were given the 2 years because he figured that by the time all this information gets back to Congress and they mull it over and argue about it and stall and redo it and rewrite it and ask more questions, it's probably going to take a couple of years. So he figured that was a pretty safe bet. In the meantime, 2 unfortunate things happened. The newspapers got a hold of the story, but they didn't bother to check out all of the details, and they just published information that Walla Walla Valley was now open for settlement. And then some other bureaucrat decided to also get in on the deal, and he started printing these deeds, and Congress mistakenly fell into the whole thing and passed the Land Donation Act, which enabled people to get land. Mr. Ransom, the man who started building this house, came out west with one of those claims in his hand. He had no idea that it really wasn't worth the paper it was written on. He wasn't the only one who showed up with one of those. So luckily he picked area of land that really wasn't close to any of the other native villages, so he never had any problems with it. He and his wife had 2 young children. They came out here from the Midwest. He already had businesses in Portland. He wanted to go check on some of those, so he hired a crew of men to start building this beautiful house. It's not a duplex, it's one house that has this passageway through the middle that's for ventilation purposes. You usually see this in houses in the south where it's varying degrees of hot all the time. Also, originally the house had the sleeping loft up above this half of the house, but when we got ready to move this building, it was too fragile, so they just took that off because visitors wouldn't be able to go up in it anyway. So this is the living room and the sleeping area. This is the dining room and the kitchen. So on warm days, she would have, so all the heat would not go into the other part of the house because of this passageway. It also provided a shady area where she could sit out here. And there are several doors and several windows in this house in order to keep it relatively comfortable. So Mr. Ransom went to Portland to check on his other businesses, left the crew here to work on this house, but on the way back from Portland, he got sick suddenly and died, and left her here with those 2 little kids, a half-finished house, and basically did not own the land. Didn't anyway, but she didn't know that. So luckily, she had the piece of paper in her hand, in her possession. He left all the family documents with her, and she was able to find some help here in Walla Walla to get that deed put in her name, which was absolutely unheard of in those days. That was the late 1850s. So that enabled her to stay here instead of having to go back east. So she got a job in town because she needed to make some money to support herself and her 2 sons, and eventually married her boss, but they kept this home and they had several more children. So